Before soul food hit the national spotlight, African-American cooks were drawing on generations of hidden genius, quieting Southern kitchens, urban cookouts, and Harlem brownstone feasts. Some classic recipes have gone missing from the family tables we remember, tucked away in church pamphlets and old recipe boxes. Tonight, we count down 25 nearly forgotten African-American recipes, each one a taste of home that slipped through the cracks. Ready to flavor your memory? Let's journey from 25 down to the #1 lost dish. Number 1, cinnamon water tea cakes. Let's go back to a kitchen where sunlight hit checkered tablecloths and the scent of sweetness floated through the air. Cinnamon water tea cakes were a cornerstone of celebration in African-American homes throughout the South. Not quite a cookie, not quite a biscuit. These delicate rounds were lovingly crafted from the most basic pantry staples: flour, sugar, a touch of lard, cinnamon, and water. Each batch was measured in memories, not tablespoons. Passed from hand to hand, these recipes lived in the minds of grandmothers and aunties, often never written down. You might remember biting into one as a child during a birthday, a baptism, or just because company was coming. They pinched pennies, but never skimped on taste, leaving behind crackly edges and soft centers, a flavor that lingered long after the last crumb was gone. Before the onset of packaged treats and supermarket cookies, these tea cakes were a rite of passage, their simplicity belying the love and skill poured into every thin round. With no packaging and scant paper trail, their legacy faded as generations shifted and convenience foods crowded them out. Today, just a handful of these recipes survive, usually shared in whispers or old church cookbooks, like those compiled in the 1980s by the Atlanta-based Black Family Reunion movement. Pause a moment, and you can almost smell that cinnamon warmth again, echoing through vanished kitchens, a taste of history on the tip of your tongue. Number 2, pea shell soup. Green, feather-light pea pods pile up in an old farmhouse kitchen, their sweet scent mixing with a swirl of broth rising from the stove. Pea shell soup was humble, practical, and resourceful. A spring ritual in Black Southern cooking, especially in the early 1900s, when every scrap counted. Instead of tossing the emptied pods aside after peas were shelled for early suppers, cooks transformed them into a delicate soup with onion, a dash of salt, and maybe a few dandelion greens plucked from the edge of the yard. This was a dish born of thrift, but imbued with a quiet pride, proof that nothing from the garden, no matter how humble, was wasted. What changed? By the time canned peas and prepackaged vegetables hit markets in the 1940s and 1950s, families relied less on the same garden ingenuity that had defined earlier decades. Cooks with more options leaned toward convenience, and the soulful, subtle flavor of pea shell soup faded into memory for most. Yet for the few who recall it, each spoonful tastes of spring rain and hope. Survival cooking elevated into something elegant. Now, the recipe survives mostly in the faded notes of community cookbooks and the storytelling of elders who understood making a meal out of what the land had to offer. The memory lingers, a swirl of green, the clink of a worn enamel pot, and a taste that turned small things into sustenance. Number 3, vinegar fried rabbit. The sizzle from the cast iron skillet once filled kitchens after a long afternoon hunt. Vinegar fried rabbit, a dish as tangy as it was golden, crowned post-hunt feasts in African-American communities, especially in the South. Proud cooks marinated fresh-caught rabbit in sharp homemade vinegar, seasoned with snipped backyard herbs like rosemary or thyme, letting the flavors sink deep before the rabbit hit the hot oil. The result was a crisp, audibly crunchy crust that gave way to tender meat every bite surprisingly bright and savory compared to everyday fried chicken. Up through the 1950s, this dish stood front and center at communal tables, feeding neighbors and kin after a good day in the woods. But as supermarkets began to fill their counters with affordable factory-raised meats, rabbits became less common, and the recipe quietly faded from weekly menus. Younger generations drawn to hamburgers or pork chops tugged the family palate away from this rustic star. By the 1970s, vinegar-fried rabbit was more legend than dinner, preserved in the stories elders shared on porches as twilight settled over the yard. The snap of that crust, the garden-bright tang. Today, it's a flavor most only know through heirloom recipe cards and memory. Yet remembering it still evokes pride and whispers of the old days, when a humble meal caught with skill became a true community centerpiece. What else might we rediscover from those passed-down feasts? Number 4. Ham bone persimmon stew. The first chill of November meant something special in Alabama's Black Belt. In kitchens dotted across the countryside, tart wild persimmons, picked soft and sun-warmed from tangled groves, met the hickory-smoked echo of a ham bone in a pot of simmering stew. This was more than dinner. For black families carving out tradition under the oaks, ham bone persimmon stew was a cherished holiday anchor throughout the 1940s. Sweet and salty danced with each taste, silky fruit balancing the rough opulence of salted pork. It demanded time and patience. Old hands mashed persimmons through a sieve, wary of seeds, while the aroma invited everyone in from the cold. Few outside these farm communities ever tasted it. Even then, wild persimmon supply was patchy. As rural foraging lost ground to grocery aisles and mechanized farming crept in after World War II, this stew slipped into memory. By the 1960s, only the most determined grandmothers still wandered the fence rows to find the flavor of their childhoods. Folks today talk about ham bone persimmon stew in almost legendary terms. A soul food unicorn nearly vanished, except for an elder's passing mention. If you ever glimpse a golden orange persimmon in the wild, close your eyes and imagine steam rising, ham and fruit joining forces, just as it did decades ago by a wood stove. Some treasures live on in stories, and maybe one day in your own kitchen. Number 5. Syllabub with plantation lemon. The clink of glass, the sweet perfume of citrus, syllabub with plantation lemon was once the crown of early African American celebrations. This frothy treat began with fresh cream, whipped by hand, then folded with fine sugar and the tart punch of plantation lemon, a variety cherished along the Atlantic coast in the 19th century. The finished foam was pillowed high in delicate glasses, radiant and cloud-light, catching the eye at weddings and Sunday gatherings alike. Unlike ready-made lemon gelatin or swift instant puddings, syllabub's magic came from patience and simple ingredients. Cream, a grating of lemon zest, a good squeeze, and sometimes a hint of Madeira or sherry. Cooks in Savannah, Charleston, and New Orleans perfected their own ratios, passing handwritten recipes through generations. As food fads shifted and boxed desserts rose to fame in the 1950s, syllabub slid quietly into the background. Bottled lemon extract replaced zested plantation fruit, and the hands that once whisked cream turned instead to supermarket shelves. By the late 20th century, hardly anyone remembered the way summer's brightness burst through the foam and most simply asked for pudding instead. But for those who ever tasted the real thing, that first frothy sip was pure sunshine, a flavor you could almost hear, echoing from the kitchen all afternoon. Let's pause for a second. Has anyone in your family ever passed down a special dessert? Do you remember tasting something homemade like this syllabub? Share your sweetest memory or secret family recipe in the comments below. Number 6. Skillet spinach with smoked turkey tails. A hazy curl of smoke rising from an iron skillet used to signal dinner time in countless West Side Chicago homes during the 1950s. Before smoked wings claimed the barbecue spotlight, turkey tails, those rich cartilage-laden ends, were the unsung key to turning humble spinach into a side dish packed with flavor. Sliced and sautéed in butter, turkey tails would release their deep, smoky fat, infusing every wilted green leaf with an aroma that lingered long after the plates were cleared. For African-American families, especially in tightly knit city neighborhoods, this dish wasn't about extravagance. It was a frugal way to dial up taste using what was on hand, and nearly every corner grocer stocked turkey tails right alongside fresh greens. As leaner eating trends emerged and grocers swapped turkey tails for boneless breasts and wings in the 1970s and 80s, this savory tradition faded from view. The spinach lost its buttery, smoky edge, and the once common tail became a rare find. Some cooks still search for that lost flavor, swearing that nothing else brings the same depth to a skillet. To this day, anyone lucky enough to remember skillet spinach with turkey tails can practically taste its earthy richness, a flavor that lingers in memory longer than any packaged green. As we wander further into this menu of lost flavors, the next chapter invites your senses and your appetite on a journey few recipes still travel. Number 7. Barbecued chicken feet. The sharp tang of barbecue sauce drifts over hot coals as laughter peals out from city sidewalks and dirt yard gatherings. Once, barbecued chicken feet were everywhere, skewered by quick-handed street vendors in New Orleans, Memphis, or Atlanta, sizzling over makeshift grills at the edges of Saturday block parties. Crispy skin blistered over smoke, then plunged into pungent vinegar-laced sauce. In the 1940s and 1950s, these feet weren't just cheap. They connected community and stretched hard-won dollars, feeding crowds when other meats were beyond reach. Many African-American elders will tell you that no true barbecue happens without these snacks, gnawing the bone, scraping every last morsel, trading secrets under summer's haze. The gnarled shape demanded patience, skill, and a reverence that transformed scraps into centerpiece. A plate passed through generations. Children watched, mimicked, finally earning the right to clean one entirely. After the civil rights era, attitudes changed. Fast food fried chicken took over, supermarkets quietly stopped stocking chicken feet, and younger folks began to turn up their noses. By the late 1970s, what was once pride at family reunions became a curiosity or inside joke, quietly vanishing from most cookouts. Yet, for some, the taste never left. Smoky, salty, a little sweet, a little wild. The scent still lingers for those who remember, and every so often, a burst of laughter signals someone has dared to barbecue the old way, gnawing a foot clean in defiance of time and trend. Number 8. Cinnamon sweet potato dumplings. The gentle hiss of syrup bubbling on the stove sets the stage. This is a dessert that draws you in before you ever get a taste. Cinnamon sweet potato dumplings, once a Harlem staple, were treasured for their comforting simplicity and unforgettable aroma. Imagine tender balls made from mashed sweet potato, rolled in flour and a touch of sugar, then lowered into a pot where dark brown syrup and cinnamon danced together. The kitchen would fill with warmth as the dumplings simmered, their sweetness deepening with every minute. In the early to mid-20th century, this treat was common at Harlem gatherings and Sunday dinners, lovingly passed from hand to hand, not likely to appear in newspaper columns, but always found at church potlucks and on Aunt Rose's stove. As processed cakes and boxed puddings grew in popularity by the 1970s, shortcuts became the norm, and this dessert faded, rarely recorded in cookbooks. Its memory lives mostly through stories and the handfuls of elders who still speak about the way bakery goods never captured the magic of home-cooked dumplings. If you've ever walked by a bakery and thought something was missing from the air, it might just be this old Harlem secret. Sweet potatoes meeting cinnamon in a symphony of steam. The taste lingers long after, warm enough to pull childhood back into the present for anyone lucky enough to remember. Number 9. Collard green kraut. Picture a bubbling crock tucked under a linen towel in a southern kitchen. Collard green kraut was once the tangy secret of home cooks from Virginia to Georgia, a recipe that united generations through the snap of vinegar-rich brine, the bright emerald of leafy collards, and the low hum of fermentation. Before store-bought jars lined every grocery shelf, families salted chopped collards and let nature do the rest, harnessing wild bacteria in a carefully monitored process that left them with a side dish more delicate and complex than anything in a can. Oral histories trace this home-fermented kraut back to the late 19th century, when preservation wasn't a trendy foodie activity, it was survival. Each batch tasted just a little different, cloudy with the memories of last year's garden and the hands that kneaded the greens. By the 1970s, refrigeration and shelf-stable relishes crept in, shrinking fermenting time to nothing more than opening a jar. Collard green kraut didn't stand a chance against the tide of store-bought convenience and near-endless choices. Today, its flavor, sour but never harsh, fresh on the tongue with each bite, is a taste lost to time, missed by all but the oldest voices in the community. Imagine that rare spoonful, earthy, sharp, and alive with history, a flavor that lingers like a stubborn memory in the back of your mind. Number 10. Blackberry lay cake. The scent of ripe blackberries used to drift from kitchen windows in late June, promising the arrival of one extraordinary dessert, blackberry layer cake. This recipe wasn't just a cake, it was a ritual. Sweet, tangy berries were layered between slices of sour cream cake, each bite sticky and lush, capturing the wildness of summer in a single forkful. Families would gather around the table during the hottest days, sharing laughs and stories as the juice ran down their fingers. Generations carefully guarded the method. Fresh-picked blackberries tumbled with sugar, a batter whipped from scratch, sometimes with a hint of homemade vanilla. By the mid-1970s, though, the tradition began to fade as boxed cake mixes and supermarket pastries edged onto the scene, offering trucked-in convenience over slow, hands-on care. The art of the lay cake, passed from elder to child, slowly slipped from memory as the rhythm of home baking changed. But for those who remember, blackberry lay cake isn't just a dessert. It carries the warmth of crowded kitchens, the excitement of berry-picking afternoons, and the proud unveiling of a treat reserved for the finest gatherings. The tartness on your tongue recalls more than flavor. It's the echo of voices and laughter from summers gone by. And as we move forward, it's the kind of legacy that asks to be rediscovered. Number 11. Okra and ham hock gumbo. Stepping into Grandmama's kitchen on a Sunday, you'd be greeted by the fragrant, smoky steam of okra and ham hock gumbo bubbling on the stove. Long before file powder became a staple, this thick, rib-sticking stew was the centerpiece of countless family meals in African-American homes, especially across the rural South. It was humble and hearty, with tough pork hock simmered to tenderness beside fat-cut discs of okra, thickened by the vegetable's own earthy silk. Into the bubbling pot would go fistfuls of fresh garden herbs, maybe parsley, thyme, and a little chopped celery for bite. Imagine the sound as the pot lid clattered and lifted, filling airtight kitchens with the scent of hickory smoke, garlic, and simmering pork. Okra and ham hock gumbo was a comfort food made from what the land and smokehouse could offer long before seafood became a gumbo star. Recipes traced back to the late 1800s, passed quietly through generations when shrimp or crab were out of reach, and pork scraps were treasure. Over time, as gumbos featuring crab, oysters, and file powder took center stage in Creole restaurants by the 1930s, the old pork-rich versions slipped quietly into memory. You can almost see the worn wooden spoon and hear the laughter that bubbled as much as the gumbo did. The taste lingers, a reminder of simpler tables, tough cuts turned tender, and a history best savored slowly as the chapter turns to the next lost dish. Number 12. Hogshead cheese terrine. Thick slices glistened on platters at family reunions and church picnics, often nestled beside fresh pickles and homemade cornbread. Hogshead cheese terrine isn't a cheese at all, but a time-honored delicacy molded from slow-simmered hog's head, seasoned with black pepper, vinegar, onions, and the tingle of red pepper flakes. The meat and natural collagen set into a sliceable, savory jelly, an old-world technique carried through generations, especially in African-American families across the rural South. In the 1940s and 1950s, you could count on someone's grandmother spending hours, sometimes days, preparing this dish for a crowd. Every serving held a peppery bite and a rich, gelatinous texture that told stories of survival and celebration. But as the decades rolled by, fewer home cooks tackled the time-consuming prep, while rising health concerns about cholesterol and sodium nudged the dish off the regular menu. By the 1970s, authentic hogshead cheese terrine had all but vanished from most dinner tables, replaced by easier, less intimidating party foods. Still, those lucky enough to have tasted the original can close their eyes and recall the cool slice melting with heat and homemade spice, a sensory keepsake from gatherings of laughter, music, and a table crowded with kin. Next, we explore another faded flavor that might jog a memory or two. Number 13, black-eyed pea patties. Hot oil crackles in a cast-iron skillet as spoonfuls of mashed black-eyed peas sizzle to a golden crust. Black-eyed pea patties, humble in their origins yet deeply satisfying, were a breakfast or supper mainstay in many Mississippi towns for generations. Made from yesterday's leftover peas, sometimes thickened with cornmeal or a touch of flour, these patties boasted a tender inside and scalloped, crispy edges that snapped between your teeth. Served with molasses or a dollop of sorghum syrup, they offered a rib-sticking protein fix before a long day in the fields or an early morning of household chores. The recipe didn't demand anything fancy, just canned or soaked dried peas, onions, salt, and pepper. This thriftiness made black-eyed pea patties a survival food during hardscrabble times, tracing their roots to African-American kitchens where resourcefulness transformed the simplest fare into something to savor. But by the 1970s, as instant breakfasts and mass-produced bread took over and canned beans became the norm, these fried gems all but vanished. Changing tastes moved families away from the smoky, hearty flavors that once filled every room. Today, old church cookbooks and yellowed recipe cards are the best hints of this lost tradition, offering whispers of thick, golden patties heaped on mismatched plates. You can almost smell the nutty aroma rising from the stovetop, and for a moment, the distant memory of gathering at your grandmother's table comes rushing back, a taste of history just waiting to be rediscovered. Parched corn and hickory nuts. Crunchy, smoky, and just sweet enough. Parched corn and hickory nuts once filled pockets and pails across the South. Long before shiny wrappers and convenience store snacks, this nourishing mix was the go-to portable fuel for African-American field hands from Tennessee down through the Carolinas. Cobs of dried corn were roasted in iron skillets or over open flames until golden and fragrant, each kernel popping with earthy sweetness. Wild hickory nuts, prized for their rich flavor, were cracked by hand and added for a buttery savor you just couldn't fake. If you ask elders who still remember, they'll tell you nothing captures fall quite like the aroma, deep, honest, almost smoky, from batches made with corn shucked straight from the summer's end. By the 1950s, though, the world had changed. Store-bought potato chips, candy bars, and packaged crackers landed on kitchen counters and lunchboxes, and these old snacks faded into near folklore. Recipes passed quietly from hand to hand, but the sound of corn popping on a winter evening grew rare. Still, a few old-timers insist no modern treat holds a candle to parched corn's wild, nutty bite. Taste it once, and autumn fields come rushing back, deep bronze against a blue sky, making you wonder how a flavor so simple could ever disappear. Number 15. Tomato okra porridge. Steam rising from a battered enamel pot, the aroma of ripe tomatoes and fresh-cut okra wafted through many a sharecropper kitchen on humid southern mornings. Tomato okra porridge, thick and rustic, was a beloved staple among African-American families from the late 19th century well into the 1950s. Simple but full of soul, this dish brought together chopped okra, juicy homegrown tomatoes, onions, salt, maybe a dash of pepper, and sometimes a handful of cornmeal to thicken up the simmering stew. Black families knew how to coax flavor out of humble ingredients, stretching what little they had to feed tired bodies just in from the fields at sunrise. You wouldn't find this porridge in glossy cookbooks. It was passed down through memory and repetition, with every cook tweaking the ratio to what was ripe in the backyard or on special at the local market. But by the 1960s, waves of convenience foods, Campbell's soups, instant grits, boxed rice, pushed this bubbling pot to the back burner. Quicker, shelf-stable sides became household mainstays, and one-pot breakfast recipes like tomato okra porridge slowly melted into memory. Still, for those who remember, there's nothing quite like the tangy, silky spoonfuls that greeted dawn, often eaten with a hunk of cornbread. That taste lingers, warm and earthy, calling back to family stories told over a pot left to bubble just a bit longer than needed, because nobody was in a hurry to let tradition go. Number 16. Sorghum spoon bread. Steam fogs the kitchen windows as a cast iron pan emerges, filled with a golden, soft-crumbed sorghum spoon bread. This comforting dish was once a centerpiece at family tables and church socials throughout the American South in the 1930s and 1940s, bringing together neighbors over something both creamy and lightly sweet. The backbone was cornmeal, stirred with care into fresh milk, a knob of butter, and the unmistakable dark sweetness of sorghum syrup. Each spoonful had a rustic, hearty aroma, sweeter and richer than a store-bought loaf could ever offer. While cornbread boxes began filling supermarket shelves after World War II, casting quick convenience as the new standard, the old ritual of stirring together sorghum, meal, and plenty of eggs slipped quietly away. The rise of national baking mixes like Jiffy made the lengthy, mindful preparation seem old-fashioned. Yet for those who remember, nothing replaces the deep, earthy flavor sorghum brings or the way hot bread melts beneath a pat of butter at sunrise. Some elders still recall these breakfasts, shared before fields needed tending or church bells started ringing, swearing no treat is quite the same. As morning glances in through fogged glass, the memory of sorghum spoon bread lingers, warm, sweet, and waiting to be rediscovered at your own table. Number 17. Fried catfish cheeks. You can almost hear the sizzle of hot oil and smell that warm, briny steam rising as catfish cheeks hit the skillet. Long before boneless fillets ruled seafood counters, these tiny, delicate morsels were prized by southern black cooks, especially across the Mississippi Delta. The cheeks, those buttery little pockets beneath the head, never made it to Grandma's Sunday spread because they were always claimed by the person doing the frying. Skillet-fried catfish cheeks were like culinary gold, light and flaky, with an almost sweet richness, a secret reward for those who knew where to find them. Old-timers say back in the 1940s and 50s, the best cooks would gently prize apart the catfish head for the tiniest morsel, a tradition more about love and skill than efficiency. Modern processing methods, focused on boneless fillets, have erased this heirloom bite from most modern plates, leaving today's diners with little knowledge of its buttery magic. It's a quiet secret, whispered over grease-popped stoves and handed down through stories, not recipe cards. Skillet-fried cheeks disappeared not just with changing food trends, but with the shift away from whole fish cooking and the slower storytelling meals of the past. Today, if you ever taste that pillowy tenderness, you're brushed by the memory of hands that worked hard and cooked with patience. Standing by the stove, grabbing the cook's prize before the rest of the world sat down, it was a secret joy, gone in a blink, but never forgotten. Number 18. Candied yams with ginger molasses. Spicy ginger, dark molasses, and buttery slices of yam wafted through many African-American kitchens, especially when holidays called for a flavorsome celebration. Before the world of mini marshmallows and modern pie fillings, candied yams were a slow ritual. Hearty yams peeled and sliced, then layered with ginger and poured over with thick molasses that clung to the spoon. After a low, patient bake in the oven, the result was a melt-in-your-mouth caramelized plate that didn't need sprinkles of white sugar, just the earthiness of the roots and the fiery warmth of ginger. This dish goes back generations, showing up in family feasts from Mississippi to Virginia long before World War II. By the 1950s, as canned yam mixes and boxed sugar glazes hit supermarket shelves, those original flavors started disappearing. Fast and sweet won out over bold and slow, nudging out the spice and depth of these classic recipes. Yet, in the kitchens that remember, someone will say this is Thanksgiving on a fork. A single taste evoking crowded dining tables and the hum of stories shared at sunset. A bite of candied yams with ginger molasses isn't just nostalgia. It's a living memory, sticky and warm, waiting to be handed down again. Number 19. Gullah red rice with crab. The rich scent of tomatoes, onion, and peppers mingling with the briny sweetness of blue crab once meant you'd found yourself in a Gullah kitchen along South Carolina's coast. Gullah red rice with crab, a dish born from the melding of West African jollof rice and local low-country catch, was a feast both humble and celebratory. Blue crab cracked and simmered right in the rice lent a flavor that was ocean bright and savory, while chunks of smoky sausage and small pink shrimp made this meal both hearty and special. Every spoonful was speckled with bits of green onion, bell pepper, and just the right amount of peppery heat, all served family style under wide porches with the sea air rolling in. By the 1950s, though, tides started to shift. Urban migration pulled families north, away from the marshes and estuaries where crab was cheap and abundant. Rising seafood prices on the coast meant the Gula's most lavish rice dish became a rare treat, a memory rather than a staple. Still, elders recall its peppery aroma on summer nights, a comfort food that tastes like history. Today, a few local cooks keep the tradition alive, but for most, Gullah red rice with crab lingers as a legend, a recipe that is low country soul, carried forward on every salty breeze. Number 20. Chitlin loaf. The tang of vinegar, the hush of early morning kitchens, and a loaf glistening on waxed paper. Chitlin loaf was once an unpretentious crown of African-American tables. In the early 1900s, chitlins weren't just a holiday dare or late-night snack. They became the foundation for a savory, spiced loaf, cooled and sliced for summer suppers, family reunions, and Sunday outings. Made with carefully washed pork intestines, onions, bell peppers, and a secret mix of spices, chitlin loaf was baked until firm, then served cold or atop piping hot cornbread. Each bite was rich and a little earthy, its taste drawing a sharp line between those who knew and those who never would. By the 1960s, though, times were changing. Chitlins grew expensive as meatpacking consolidated and rural traditions faced urban skepticism. Safety concerns and shifting ideas about prosperity made this once beloved loaf a tough sell to a new generation. What was a badge of family resourcefulness and pride became a point of contention at the dinner table. Today, you might find chitlins on New Year's or the odd soul food menu, but chitlin loaf, the tidy centerpiece that once signaled celebration and grit, has slipped quietly into memory. The aroma lingers only if you grew up around it, peppery, steamy, layered with stories you can nearly taste. Number 21. Cowpea and okra ragu. Steam rolling off a battered pot on a Gulf Coast stovetop, mixing with the late afternoon hush after busy days on the water. That's the world of cowpea and okra ragu, a dish steeped in the rhythms of black dockside families. Freshly shelled cowpeas, chunky slices of okra, scattered onions, and a handful of smoked neck bones all cooked together slowly, letting the flavors blend until every spoonful was thick with the essence of earth, sea, and smoke. It wasn't just supper. It was the promise of comfort and togetherness at the end of a long day hauling nets or unloading crates. This ragu carried more than flavor. It fed people in lean times, stretching a little meat for a lot of mouths, loaded with nutrition and warmth. You might find the recipe in an old family box scribbled in fading ink, but rarely in modern cookbooks. With the rise of supermarkets, canned soups, and quick meals in the 1960s and 70s, even Gulf families drifted away from these slow-cooked rituals. Today, you'd be hard-pressed to find this savory stew on menus or even whispered about at church socials. Yet those who remember speak of its peppery depth and the way every bowl invited you to slow down, breathe, and be with your people. Next time you spot fresh okra at the market, imagine the smoky tang and shared stories simmering back to life. Number 22. Fish roe and grits breakfast. Crisp, golden on the outside and tender within, fish roe and grits breakfast was a coastal staple long before salmon croquettes ever stirred southern pans. For generations, especially throughout the Deep South, African-American families savored mullet roe freshly pulled from the morning catch. simply seasoned, dredged in a dusting of cornmeal, and fried until the tiny eggs popped with a briny, buttery punch. Stone-ground grits, slow-cooked to a velvet cream, made the perfect soft bed to soak up the rich ocean-kissed flavors. In the dawn kitchens of the Carolinas and Florida, recipes for fish roe grits date back to at least the 1940s. For many elders, one whiff of that brackish aroma brings back scenes of Sunday breakfasts, when the most delicate treat came from what others overlooked. By the 1980s, though, stricter food safety laws and shifting tastes nudged fresh fish roe off most markets and out of home kitchens, even in coastal towns where the tradition lingered the longest. Where once it was an affordable comfort for those in fishing communities, today it's a rare find mostly spoken of in stories. For those lucky enough to recall it, the memory still shimmers, salty, soft, and impossibly rich, conjuring misty docks, chatter of early risers, and the pride of turning humble, overlooked bounty into a breakfast that lingered all morning. A fleeting bite of the sea, now mostly vanished from the table, but vivid in the hearts that remember. Number 23, Brunswick stew with rabbit. Steam and smoke drift through memory, conjuring up a bubbling cast-iron pot over an open fire. Brunswick stew with rabbit was not just a meal, but a gathering brought to life by African-American cooks on back porches and patches of bare earth after the Civil War. Ingredients were humble: wild rabbit, sweet corn cut fresh, tomatoes plucked at peak ripeness. The stew simmered for hours, flavors growing richer as stories were told and hands reached for extra helpings beneath the tall southern pines. Tracing its roots to Reconstruction, Brunswick stew became an improvisational staple, one that showcased ingenuity when resources got thin. By the time rabbit waned from everyday kitchens after World War II, people began tossing in chicken or pork instead. The recipe bent to changing times and tastes, but something basic slipped away. Published church cookbooks from the 1920s and 1930s often called for one young rabbit, dressed and cut, referencing a time when wild game was dinner, not delicacy. Store-bought meats eventually replaced what could be hunted or trapped. The stew endured, yet it tasted a little less wild and a little less free. To those who remember, the dish carries more than flavor. It holds the echo of laughter around a borrowed pot and the comfort of something crafted from whatever the land and season allowed. That earthy, communal spirit, savory and honest, is what lingers most, even when the original recipe is nearly lost to time. Number 24, baked egg pie. Nothing said the end of a joyful black church picnic quite like the unveiling of a golden baked egg pie, its surface dusted with nutmeg and its perfume promising delicate sweetness. Born during the Great Migration, when African-American families transformed simple ingredients into memorable feasts, this pie was equal part thrift and celebration. Imagine a creamy eggs and milk custard poured into a sturdy hand-pressed crust and baked until just set. No frills, just lush comfort in every bite. Unlike the flashier chess or lemon pies, the baked egg pie was a subtle star, lighter, silkier, letting the warmth of its spices and the pureness of home-churned butter shine through. Cooks across the Midwest and North, in cities swelling with Southern newcomers during the 1920s, swapped secrets for achieving the silkiest texture, maybe grating fresh nutmeg or brushing the crust with melted butter for extra crispness. It graced tables from Detroit to Chicago well into the 1960s, shared alongside fried chicken and ice-cold red pop. But as boxed puddings and instant custards crowded shelves in the 1970s, the egg pie began to slip away. Modern palates lean toward bolder flavors or quicker fixes, leaving this old soul of a dessert gathering crumbs of memory rather than accolades. Still, some elders say you'll never taste a smoother pie. If you close your eyes, inhale the faint scent of nutmeg, you just might hear the laughter and music of a church lawn long ago. Number 25. Smothered quail with mustard greens. The aroma of game bird and simmering greens once filled country kitchens across the South, especially on Sundays when families gathered after church. Smothered quail with mustard greens was a cherished tradition, a recipe born of both necessity and ingenuity. Wild-caught quail, hunted by hand from local fields, was slow-cooked until its tender meat nearly slipped from the bone. The gamey richness mingled with mustard greens, their peppery bite tamed by a long, steady simmer and generous spoonfuls of pan drippings. This wasn't just food, it was an event, a symbol of the countryside's resourcefulness. Into the 1960s, these dishes defined rural weekends, bridging survival and celebration for African American families. Knowledge of finding, cleaning, and stewing quail passed from elders to eager youngsters, often over cast iron pots and coal-fired stoves. But as hunting grew scarce and supermarkets introduced frozen poultry, the ritual lost its place at many tables. By the late 20th century, most home cooks had switched to chicken or left wild game behind altogether. Yet those who remember recall the unmistakable tang of vinegar-wilted greens, the quiet pride of sharing a hard-won meal, and the sound of laughter echoing through kitchens steeped in tradition. Today, smothered quail with mustard greens floats like a half-remembered melody through family stories, an echo from a time when every meal told a deeper story. What new flavors might take root as we honor the ones nearly lost? Let's pause for a second. Did your family ever gather around a dish that's disappeared from the weekly table? Tell us what that meal was and who made it best in the comments. We can't wait to hear your forgotten food stories.